All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second episode of Base 2, the podcast by Tensordyne, in which we talk about AI and the technical background behind everything, AI infrastructure, agents, which will be the topic of today. And I'm very excited to have Jonas Diezun here with me, calling in from South Africa, I think. Me calling in from Germany, from our second headquarter, and we'll be talking about the current state and the future of AI agents. What is working, what isn't working, and what are enterprises doing to align with the future of AI and its value. And I would like to first maybe talk a little bit about Jonas and me going back quite a bit. We've known each other for, I think, 13 years probably, when we first met at the CDTM, kind of a founder school in Munich. And then later we actually worked together at Konux. I think it's right to say that it was one of the first AI, or at least real-time AI unicorns in Europe. That was back in 2015, 14, 16, 17. I think Jonas was leading marketing, sales, business, a lot of things. And I was on the engineering side. Definitely had a good time. And yeah, Jonas has done a lot of different startups of very large scale since then. Very successful track record. Now CEO of Beam AI. Which is very exciting. I remember when you started the company, the topic of agents was actually very little. It was almost non-existent. Yeah. And I was like, what is he doing? And I swear to God, like, people probably asked me for like a year, you know what Jonas is doing now? And every time I was like, well, I have like a rough idea, and now, so it was a very good prediction, I think, of what will happen later. Very excited to talk to you about what you see out there in the field. You're probably in Europe, if not the first, maybe one of the first companies that are bringing agents with real value to enterprises. So very nice to have you. Thank you. And let me maybe kick things off by asking you, what are agents doing today? What are the most impressive use cases you see? What is blowing you away lately?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And it's a pleasure to be here. And it's kind of a bit like a homecoming. It's been a long journey we've both been in, like talking about AI already like 12 years back or more. And I think what we've done together also at Konix has really shaped me and also kind of, led me to actually founding Beam then in the end. As you said, when we started the company's agents weren't there. We actually started the company and we said, well, AI is growing exponentially, humans are not. And then we said, well, let's try to rebuild humans. It can't be that hard. Turned out it was super, super hard. In the beginning, nothing really worked for a long time. I remember having demos. I did VC pitches, and like there was a 50% chance that the agent would kind of work, and there was a 50% chance that it wouldn't, which was really tough. And then we went around. I was even in the Silicon Valley telling people, hey, we're building agents, and they're like, hey, this is still 5 years out. But then this human simulacra paper came, and then kind of things started to really, really accelerate from there. Now, like 3 years later, the most impressive cases with agents are actually not the most fancy ones or the most technically elaborate ones, but the ones that actually make it in production and then provide real value. We have customers where we deploy like 80 different agents, and step by step, we're really helping them to transform the whole organization. And a lot of the work that we focus on as a company is, you might say, boring, but it's repetitive work that nobody really likes doing. And that might lead to companies having massive backlogs. Another customer of ours has 100,000 cases in the backlog. And obviously that's not good because it's lost revenue for them. And it's also not good for their clients. And what I really love to see is when we can have an impact and when we can really accelerate and kind of solve these real business pain points rather than building elaborate AI agents demos. That was really cool like 2 years ago, but now I think it's all about actually getting it into production, providing real business and making sure that the customer is happy with that.
Yeah, you said a couple of things that are very interesting and also make me laugh a little bit. Rebuilding humans. I think that's the ambition that not a lot of people dare to maybe talk about sometimes, because obviously it also has some intense implications for society and so on. But let's maybe talk about this later a little bit more.
Yes.
Very recently, I talked to someone very high up at a very large hyperscaler in the US, and she is basically leading, finding out how to build valuable agents for very large enterprises. And so she's probably also touching all of these things, like, the change management to really transform the organization and so on. And I found it very interesting when I talked to her to find out that things are still very much at the beginning, and people are just trying to figure out how to do stuff. Cost doesn't matter, speed doesn't matter. All of these metrics that, me as a chip guy, an infrastructure guy, care a lot about, because that is, after all, the value we bring to the table. That was yet not relevant. I would love to hear maybe a little bit more about, what are the adoption hurdles in the beginning? What do you need to bring to the table to convince a customer first? And then what is kind of the deepest adoption state that you see in clients today? And what do they then care about? I mean, you said 80 agents, right? That sounds almost like a chaotic, army of non-human workers that somehow need to be tamed, and probably also need their own little HR department, maybe, in a way.
That's very true. Yeah.
Yeah. So please.
So I think this orchestration of different agents in organization is very challenging. And we start typically off by doing very narrow use cases initially. And we always see it's a mistake that some people, we want to do everything. We have this crazy problem with our competitors. We need to do analyses, but we also need to figure out where we have sales opportunities, and we want to build one agent that essentially scans the whole market and then tells us what to do strategically. That's really, really hard. And it's something that also wasn't really solved with one single human, right? So you would have a strategy department, and you would have a lot of people sitting there, and then they were right like 60% of the time, and very often they weren't right. And when you start doing these cases, we see that it's very hard to do. Yet in very, very narrow use cases and very clear, well-documented cases, we see that you can actually get these agents into production incredibly fast. Now, recently, we are able to get agents actually into production into a couple of days. I think the record now was 4 hours, but this was an incredibly well-documented process that previously was outsourced. And because of that, they had a lot of onboarding materials for their outsourcing BPOs. So we essentially just took that, put it into the agent, and then we were able to reproduce that really, really fast. But a lot of the processes in companies are not well documented. There's a lot of ambiguity in the process, and there's a lot of ambiguity in how you can do things. And then people come and be like, I want AI, and it's going to do all of this better, and it's not going to work. And for us, the priority in which cases we do has shifted a bit. Like initially, we always said you don't want to do the hardest, but you don't also want to do the easiest case, so that you can show a bit in the middle how well agents are doing. Now we're very strict. Like, is there documentation on this case? Are you clear about what you want to do? And if that's the case, then we prioritize this, because this is the best predictor for time to value. And what kills a lot of AI project is, yes, time to value, and that can have different forms. The demo is nice, but then in production, it doesn't really provide the ROI. So ultimately, it's about bringing agents into production as fast as you can and providing the value. And for this, our focus is really on having the documentation with the client ready to do this well.
Yeah. Okay. That reminds me. It's like a PTSD flashback to our predictive maintenance times at Konux, where companies said, I totally want to predict when that machine will fail, but they don't have the data. They don't have a clear idea of how that's going to happen. And it's interesting that every AI wave always starts at this problem, right? Like, people are very eager to do something, but they might not even realize they're not prepared for it. I mean, can you give maybe a tip to the listeners? If your company, small or large, should you start messing around with agents right away, or do you think it's actually a good thing to maybe invest 1 or 2 months first into cleanup and making up your mind and then starting with this, and what would that look like?
So we see wildly different states of AI readiness at our clients. 3 years ago, a lot of companies were, we want to do something, and they had no idea. Now there are certain clients that have a pretty clear idea of what they want to do and how to start it. My general advice is always you need to get started regardless how. You are not going to have the perfect data set, you're not going to have the perfect process documentation, and you're not going to have all of the people in the organization really wanting to try out AI. It's like there's going to be resistance and problems in a lot of different ways. So the most important thing really is to get started somewhere. And then what we recommend, and what's typically an easy win, is look at the processes or jobs that you have outsourced. For enterprise, that's fairly straightforward. They have shared service centers or they have massive BPOs sitting somewhere. And you can outsource these jobs because you have a clear definition of what needs to be done. You are able to onboard people that are not in your core organization to do that job. So if that's the case, you can onboard an AI agent in a reasonable time frame to do that job as well. If you have people in the organization that have been trained for 15 years, like back to predictive maintenance, that listen to the sound of the pump in certain environments, that's really, really hard to mimic. You don't have that data. You don't have all of the knowledge that this person has and the mental models. So it's typically for enterprises a very easy win to look at these outsourced processes. The benefit of that is as well that the ROI is very clear. After a few months, you either like change the contract or cancel it, and that makes it very easy then also to see really benefit on the monetary side.
Yeah, cool. Okay, very, very interesting. I haven't heard that before, that if you have a freelancer, a contractor, you've outsourced something, then there's a higher likelihood that it can be replaced by an agent. Very interesting, but it instantly resonates with me, because if I think about how we deal with internal people working on something versus external people working on something, whenever it's external, right, there's a little bit of, okay, what am I really going to expose to them, right? Am I just going to give them access to our entire GitHub? Well, no, just to this and that, right? And then you think so much more about their workflow, actually, than if an internal person would be doing it. Very interesting. Cool. So, I mean, maybe that, right, raises the point of maybe you have to generally also, to get ready for agents, almost treat every internal employee as if they were a contractor, and really think about their workflow, think about their ins and outs. But I guess this comes then also, as you said, right, through trying out things and learning by doing. Yeah, cool. Very interesting. I mean, this gets us maybe a little bit back again to the point of replacing humans. One of the questions I put down for us as a prep was, in 10 years, 2036, right? I mean, if we project this gradual process of replacing human workers with agents, I guess a more nice way to put this would be to make them much more efficient and effective. But then maybe you don't need that many people. Where do you see this heading? I mean, do you really think that today there might be companies doing certain products, operating in certain fields that maybe have 1,000 employees, and you will see this shrinking down to 100 employees over the next 10 years?
So I think first, what we see also with our clients, it's not so much about really replacing the humans. That's not the case. Most often it's about reducing backlog. It's about increasing the quality. It's about doing things faster. It's about doing things better. And it's not so much about just saying, hey, look, I want to cut this team and then goodbye. And that doesn't really happen yet. And I don't think it will that quickly. However, as you said, it's very important that you can utilize, or the people in your company can do more. And this is now, for me, in my last company, we were 500 people after 2 years. And when I now look at what we've done there and what all of the different jobs were, would we have needed 500? Most certainly not. Probably we could have done it with 100 and a lot more automations, a lot more agents, a lot of better structure and processes as well. So this is definitely something that is changing. I think right now there is a certain limit to how many agents you can run and maintain simultaneously as well. So I don't think it's reasonable to say that there's one employee and you have 1,000 agents that do a job. Like there's no way that you can maintain and orchestrate that. I think realistically right now it's probably somewhere between 5 to 25 agents that you can realistically like monitor and adjust, because there's still, for the type of work that we do, there are exceptions that you need to handle. There's input that you need to give. These models are not perfect. The agents are not perfect. You need to provide input. So yes, you can multiply your work a lot and you can do a lot of things faster. But I don't think it's going to be like 10 employees and a million different agents. It's probably going to be 10 employees that have like 1,000 agents, maybe at max, that then run the whole organization step by step. But we'll see also, I think right now, realistically, we can dream always and we can push this, but there are gaps as well still, and things that don't work as well, and where you shouldn't trust everything in the AI yet, or on the AI yet.
Yeah. Cool. So I guess a good way to then maybe put it would be, let's say you have 1,000 employees today. Yes, maybe you'll scale that back to, maybe not even scale it back at all, but you will just make every employee so much more effective that you will just compete much better against your competitors. Yeah.
Yes, and the beauty is you can, for example, you have bugs, you can reply faster to your customers. Previously, you had a certain capacity constraint and the engineer wasn't available, and then the product guy needed to vet it, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, like, you have a linear agent, you kind of orchestrate it, and then you can solve it a lot faster. And that's better for your customers, and they're going to be more happy.
Yeah. One of the most impressive examples I've heard recently, I forgot who told me that, but you have a German car dealership, or it could be in any country, I guess. But I guess the average revenue of a VW car dealership in Germany is around 50 million, and they could increase this by 10 million, 20%, only if they had, I don't know if you can call this an agent, but basically an AI bot that accepts every single call whenever someone calls, hey, can I do a test drive? And then that gets summarized, it gets sent to the salesperson, then basically async, the salesperson can work through that and they don't miss any customers anymore. That was super impressive, right? Because the cost of AI to do this is, of course, almost nothing, right? I mean, per call is maybe 50 cents to run that model and the speech to text and the text to speech. But the value you get out of it is completely outperforming the cost. Yeah, very interesting.
Yes, and maybe to add, there are a lot of jobs where people copy stuff from PDFs into order forms. It makes no sense. And a lot of people do that all the time. You fill out something, and if you take that away, it means that they can focus on better things, being with the customer, having these conversations, or talking to the people internally, and that's the biggest impact that we see first.
Yeah, I think, I mean, maybe I'm projecting a little bit too much for myself here, but I think it's not wrong to say that most workers out there today would really benefit from maybe just for 2 hours sitting down, maybe with a little bit of YouTube and a little bit of back and forth with ChatGPT to reflect on what in their work is, can be added to with an agent and what maybe cannot be automated. So this really consciously doing this reflection, I think would actually be a super valuable thing. What does that look like that initial exploration stage? Let's say you're working with a new customer and they're not very well prepared and you can fairly early on tell, what are the first things you do with them to help them reflect on what is replaceable or automatable or whatever you want to say, whatever you want to call it?
So typically we have a pretty good idea by now when we talk to clients what the use cases are, based on the company, based on the people that we talk to, based on the type of jobs that we estimate. In the beginning, it was like, oh, tell us what you want to do. And now it's, hey, look, we think you have this system. I don't know, you use SAP or something. So probably you do this kind of process over and over again. And then you have maybe 10 people doing it, or you have 600 people doing it. And that's where we should start. I think generally AI adoption and implementation benefits a lot from extended planning phases rather than just jumping into it. It's the same what you've now introduced in Cloud Code and everywhere. Plan a lot, understand, and we even build our own system for that for our solution engineers that where you essentially set up projects, and then you put in the transcripts if you have, you put in all of the questions that you have, and then it starts based on what we need to know based on our system, starts to ask questions essentially that needs to be answered in order to proceed. And with this system, you spend a lot of time asking things, and you spend a lot of time trying to find edge cases. And only if you have a certain good understanding, then you actually start implementing and building the agent. So, and this is something that we see with our clients in the process. And the result of that is, if you plan really well, you can build the agents in hours or even minutes. Then it's not a problem anymore. But what really takes a massive benefit, if you build something, then you realize you need to change it because that was not the right approach, and then you need to redo it, and then you need to redo it, etc. This is what you know from every IT project, but changes later obviously make it harder. But what is now amazing is that you, with AI, can take a lot of these uncertainties and questions already to the beginning of the process if you are well structured. And then you can really benefit from faster adoption.
Great, awesome. You mentioned SAP, obviously just as an example, but I think I also saw on your website that you're by now integrating with a staggering amount of APIs and tools and other frameworks and softwares. I guess the exploration phase within a company, right, it has a lot to do with that, right? Like if you need to connect to, like, I don't know, in our case, for example, right, we use Notion, we use Slack, we use Google Drive. So we have lots of different data sources. And then I can imagine that in much bigger companies, it's much more fragmented. Are you, like, what does that look like? I can imagine that maybe in the beginning, a lot of softwares weren't exactly ready to be integrated with something like MCP. Has that improved? Do you think it's at a good state now? Yeah, maybe if you can talk a little bit about the state of integration with other software APIs.
No, it's not where it should be yet. A lot of software, and you mentioned Notion, Google Drive. Yeah, that's super nice. Notion MCP has its problem itself, but overall it's pretty amazing and it's fairly straightforward. There is a lot of software that these companies run on that don't have any sort of API, and you need to send emails back and forth, or like maybe you can install, or you can use some webhooks, or you actually need to build middleware in order to connect to it properly. And then once in the night, you do an upload and you write directly in the database. That's what we have to do with some of our clients as well. So even though we have a lot of different integrations, the reality is that there's always something custom. So you need to get really quick in building custom integrations and connecting to different systems. There's like not every client, but I would say at least every other week, we have somebody, oh, what about browser use? Because we know the system doesn't have an API, and can we use browser use in order to connect to that? And then it's like, yes, you could, but it's right now not really reliable, so it's not going to get you where you want to be, so you probably shouldn't, and you should do something else. And this is then again where you need to be very clear and understand where tech is, because right now with browser use you get to 50-60%, and if you're lucky then you can make it 70, but for a lot of processes it's not going to be enough if you need to get to 95-98% accuracy and show that it's really reliable. So overall, software integration is a massive pain point. It's really difficult to connect to some systems just because they were never built in this way. It is getting better because there are more options available in how to connect. And now from like APIs to MCP, now kind of skills wrapping APIs and not using MCP. Again, there's a lot of changes still. So it's still in the early phases. We see progress, but it's a massive bottleneck.
Very interesting. Okay. So the job of writing custom integration is a big part of adopting agents then. Yeah, yes. I can totally see this, right? I mean, if you have some old industrial machines or so, it's probably almost a nightmare, right? I mean, you have to get very custom and so on, yeah. Also interesting what you said about thinking, hey, I'm a human and I can click on buttons in a browser and that's how I do it every day. Why couldn't an AI do this? And then, yeah, I can totally see that probably it might work at like 90% accuracy. But then what does 90% accuracy mean in the real world? And maybe if you can comment on that and tell us a little bit of, about what does that 99.9% ambition mean? How realistic is it? And how can you live in the face of only achieving, I don't know, 95%, maybe with some few examples or so?
So we have clients where it's very data sensitive. So you need to get to 99 point something percent in the whole process. Typically, we say that anything 95% is typically the goal. So the AI is allowed to do some mistakes, but it shouldn't be 70%. Then typically people don't trust it. Now, the interesting thing is you need to see it from a couple perspectives. Number one is, like, when are you happy with whatever the expectations were, and when do you meet them? The second is, if you do human work or human-like work, you should know what the current accuracy of humans is in that. And there are a couple of fun stories that we now discovered over time. For example, in recruiting in HR, where initially we thought the agent wasn't working because we didn't get the accuracy up. And then we realized actually that the data sample that we have, that the people were doing mistakes, and they were very bad at essentially predicting whether this person was a good hire or not, which is, if you look at the science, not really surprising, because it's hard for people. And then you realize that AI is actually already much better than the current alternative, which often are the humans. And then you see that you can already sometimes live with 80% because it's already better. However, now you also need to make an additional distinction, which is, what is the type of error? If you just, for example, you write the address slightly wrong because there is, I don't know, some dot in there that shouldn't have been in there, or some dash, then that's not really bad. But now let's say you do a case and you copy the wrong customer email for whatever reason, because it was still like in the memory, or it wasn't, or it was somewhere else, and you copy the wrong email and you send the case not to the customer, but, for example, I don't know, to a lawyer or somebody else who was in that document, then that's really bad, because then you have privacy issues, etc. So what we do is that we look at the agent as a whole, on like, how well is the agent in doing the job, but we also even go down to a variable level and determine the accuracy on certain variables. And on certain variables, we need to get to 90.999 something. And that then just means that we do a lot of additional checks in order to get there.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, this also reminds me again a little bit about the early days of autonomous driving, when, for example, I remember the first fatality that Tesla had to face publicly. I think they responded then quite shortly afterwards with, yeah, guys, like, it's really bad what happened. We absolutely acknowledge that, but look at how many million kilometers nothing happened. And now once something happened, it is still far safer than a human. But I think what not a lot of people really put the light on is, okay, I got to 95%, but what happens exactly, as you say, in the other 5%? Is it complete disaster? Yes. And I have no way of tracking it, and I don't even know who to hold accountable? Liability is suddenly a big question, right? Or is it something that maybe I can see coming, I can totally track, I can reproduce to learn from it? That I think is really what makes even 90% okay to live with, or not. Yeah, very interesting.
Yes, absolutely. And a very practical example, in the beginning, we had on our platform just the status failed. So the agent wasn't able to conclude the task for whatever reason. And then we realized it's a bit too negative. So we introduced additional failed state, which was essentially failed, or like stopped because insufficient information, which means like, hey, it didn't do the job properly, and somehow there was information missing that should have been maybe somewhere. And it's a very different story then suddenly. And then you can look at this more nuanced, and it's not, oh yeah, this is one failed state.
Yeah, makes sense. The interpretation of failure. That's another big topic for another podcast, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah. And maybe just to add, so I wrote my bachelor thesis back in the days on behavioral economics, and I then got into the rabbit hole of all of these heuristics that people use and all of the mistakes that they repeatedly do. And then I saw actually people are doing mistakes all the time in many different ways. And AI a lot of times is very clear and very good. But there are also other biases that prevent people from now acknowledging that. And they say, oh, well, it did one mistake here, it's not working. And when you ask them, how often did you do this mistake? And then like, oh yeah, I do this all the time.
Yeah. Okay, I have a few more very exciting points to talk about, but maybe let's, piggybacking on this whole 90 versus, 99.9% accuracy, what are concretely the things where you see agents breaking? I think you already touched a lot of points. Do you maybe have a few examples? I mean, so the training data or the inspiration data, the reference data, the reference points can be a problem you mentioned. Is it also otherwise just the sheer model quality or the state of model quality that we live with today with the latest LLMs, or what is holding back agents from becoming better?
So model quality is still a topic, and you also need to take into account there's always quality of the model, there's the cost, and there's also the speed. And going back to what you also discussed, hardware initially, like, yes, we can use the latest model on pretty much every check and everything that we do, and the quality gets up, but then it's first incredibly slow, and it's very, very expensive then suddenly, and then it doesn't make sense if you suddenly pay, let's say, $5 on some task, because you want to get this down to 50 cents or something. So ultimately, the trade-off is important. And if quality increases with lower costs, that's going to benefit a lot, because you can run more checks. You can essentially, I think by now it's fairly clear that AI can catch its own errors in a lot of cases. And I think the 80% with what the OpenAI recently studied, and that's what we see as well. You can catch a lot of errors. Yeah, you just need to do additional checks and additional checks and additional checks. And at one point, this is not really economically making sense anymore. So that's the first point, and we're really looking forward to that. I think the second point you mentioned is insufficient data or insufficient procedural knowledge as well. And when you do a process and there's factual knowledge of what you actually need to do, and there's a lot about how does this process work, how do I decide in certain situations, etc. And customers typically know their happy path, and then they know kind of the most frequent exceptions. And then what happens in this case? And you know this from, like, in every company, there's this one person that you then need to ask on how to solve this particular case, because it's not really covered and nowhere written down. And then these things are hard to do for AI as well. And now what we've seen is there are certain ways to overcome this step by step. Obviously, the more input and the more data you have, the better. But we, for example, also started experimenting a lot with synthetic data sets, and then you just have more variants and you test it, and then you see what happens, and then you can catch more cases. And really, how to imagine this is ultimately you build simulations of the world, and you run it and you run it and you run it, and that helps you to catch more errors or more edge cases. Yes, it's expensive, but typically it's worth it. And this is also something that we now increasingly do with our clients, because we always ask, oh, can you give this information? You don't get it? Fine. Then we just assume certain things, and we are right a lot of times. Work mostly, it's not always that difficult. So you can prevent a lot of errors and mistakes this way.
Okay. Yeah, I got it. You mentioned simulations. When I want to evaluate the output of an agent, how can I imagine this in the real world? Like, for example, let's say I don't know, I'm a big company with lots of people traveling, so I have to constantly book travels, maybe through TravelPerk or so, and I want to automate this completely with an agent. So in natural language, I don't know, I'm a McKinsey partner, and I tell my agent, hey, next week, check my calendar. You'll see when I will need to be in, I don't know, Johannesburg, and please, book the usual business class trip to there. The hotel I like, just look it up in my booking.com. I forgot the name. Boom, suddenly lots of different tools have to be touched, right? How do I test the output quality of that? Is it literally that I give the output again to another AI model and ask it, hey, can you please verify whether this trip even makes sense? Or, I mean, there are so many other softwares and so many other tools involved. How do I even evaluate whether the right thing happened? Do I have to, like, I don't know, contact booking.com and ask like ask, did this booking actually happen, right? I mean, do I literally have to pay for it to see that whether it goes through, and that's the only way to learn from it, or no?
Yes. So slightly longer answer, but there are multiple ways how to get feedback. Ultimately, you need to get feedback in some sort of way in order to evaluate whether something was done in the right way or not. The first is you can just have an LLM feedback this LLM as a judge, and you can do this in many different ways. Something that we did in the early days was professor-student model. So you would essentially say, this was the task of a student. You are 3 professors, you generate them, you essentially open this virtual world, and you say, tell us how well it did. And then you can run this a lot of times, and then you're good. Now, you can also use more deterministic approaches if you know what the outcome should be. For example, in invoices, or with a lot of in a lot of finance cases, you can calculate stuff, or you execute code to do sense checks. And with that, it's more deterministic than when you just have an LLM. This is specifically important for everything finance related. So you start then mixing that, and then there is the aspect of human feedback. And now there are multiple different ways to collect this feedback. There's always the up and down, thumbs up in chats that you also know from ChatGPT and everywhere else. Realistically, nobody's really doing that, or very few people are only doing that. So that's not always helpful. But there are other ways how to see. So we can observe, for example, we provide a certain output. Let's say we draft an order email. So the customer comes, wants to order something. We go through the whole process of configuring the product and preparing an order form. And then what we do just later is we observe what was really done. And then we take this and we take the delta and we learn of this. This is best case, because it helps us really well to understand what the issues are and do that. And so the point here is, the easier you can make it to collect and gather that feedback, the better. If you need humans to click a button, it's good, but they don't do it very often. It might actually, with our clients, we sometimes have dedicated teams whose job is to give feedback. So you do 1,000 cases and they need to give feedback on all of this. Then it's good as well. They might do additional mistakes, which you then need to get out. So sometimes you need to do 2 rounds. So multiple different ways. Ultimately, you want to make it as easy as possible. The best is if you just observe and take the delta of what you predicted and what the ultimate outcome was, and you use this to feed back into the system and iterate on it.
Yeah. And if the partner ends up in Cape Town instead of Johannesburg, then that's how you learn. Yeah.
Then that would be pretty easy to spot. Huh?
Yeah. Probably ahead of time, before even boarding.
On the wrong side.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we're talking about funny examples here, but what are some concrete examples that you, obviously, as far as you can disclose, right, but that you see with some clients, maybe something that blew you away, something that you wouldn't have thought was possible yet, something where you were super happy about how your customer worked with you on making this possible? Or also, what are the very common things that people try to automate these days?
So we focus mostly on all sorts of back office and BPO work and RPO work. Recruiting, finance, etc. So we wouldn't necessarily do the booking, but we do the travel expense forms that people then later have to fill out, and we need to check whether the partner actually expensed correctly. And this was one agent that with a client we built in 4 hours, because they had documented everything. So we built it super easy. Previously, they had 10 people doing that. And then that was fairly straightforward and done. This was a case where I was very happy because it was very clear and very fast. 6 months ago, it would have cost us a lot more time, because you need to define all of these edge cases. Now we just create the agent, we catch the edge cases, we do some simulation, we have these synthetic data sets, and so we can get into production incredibly fast. That's one point. Another where I was very happy was with a large automotive enterprise, where we used more parts of these self-learning mechanisms that we have. So we kind of observed the system, and the system over time, people were asking things, and then the system had to do certain maintenance processes, actually, interestingly enough. And for that, they had different complexity in the requests that needed to be done. Very simple, queries where you would just ask something about a certain like state or a certain material, or very complex calculations where you actually would generate code, then execute the code, and then take the outcome and see how this related in that particular case. And with that, we got accuracy up from, I think, 32% to 75%, just by letting the system run and observe it. So previously, people always had to ask again and again, oh, it's not correct, it's not correct. And now on the first shot, you get just like 75%, which is pretty crazy when you think about it, because it's a super complex thing to do. And we would probably need to train a few years to be able to do that. So this was technically amazing. And what this helps us now with is reducing the time to set up systems to high accuracy. In this travel expense, super easy, but even in fairly complex cases, we can now do it incredibly fast. And the good thing is, with the self-learner aspect, systems are more adaptable, so they don't break as fast. If a new case comes, it sees it, it can deal with that, and there's a certain likelihood or a high likelihood that it actually does this correctly. And this is what I'm really excited about now in the future, is that these systems become better in understanding cases that they've never seen. And because of that, you get to high accuracy and high ROI really fast without a lot of intervention and without a lot of edge case definition, etc.
Yeah. You're mentioning a super big topic, right? Self-learning AI systems at large major AI conferences, but also at CES, I think people are starting to talk more and more about this, and it even has implications also for us, because, you know, when we think about our next silicon generation, we literally have to look at this, you know, what does that exactly look like? I would love to double click on this with you. Like, what technologically does that exactly look like? Is it that you add something to a RAG database and that's how the system then learns? Do you literally fine tune weights? How does that self-learning loop actually work?
Yeah, good question. And there's no easy answer, because it's still in definition, and it's progressing really rapidly. So I think the easiest form of self-learning is just reviewing essentially what you have done and then writing short corrections. It might even, the easiest form might even be memory in Claude or in ChatGPT. So you just save something and then next time you know it. Now you can also use like micro skills or skills for that. So I do something and then I say, hey, look, let me correct that. And then we use that in order to save these learnings. In our system, we have sessions as well. So for example, when we set up an agent and we do a certain planning session, then afterwards we close the session, and essentially the system goes through everything that we've done, and it saves what didn't work and what feedback it got during that process. And we use that essentially and save it and store it. And that's right now just markdown files, so it's very, very simple. But it helps tremendously to catch a lot of errors. Now, the problem is sometimes you also need to unlearn, which makes it really hard, because sometimes let's assume that you did it in a certain way because the feature wasn't available in the platform, but now engineering pushed a new feature, and now you need to unlearn what you previously did because now that feature is available and you can actually do it in an easier way. So then you open the whole topic of managing information forgetting, which becomes super, super complex as well. On the other side, there is what you mentioned, prompts, or actually adjusting weights, so that it gets better in executing something and you rewrite the prompt, for example. So in the beginning, you might have a prompt that's fairly short for a particular case, and then over time it gets in like to visualize this a bit, you just add exceptions, you add all of the rules in that prompt, and then when you execute, it's obviously better in doing this. And then at a certain point, now you realize that this single prompt is not sufficient anymore to optimize for whatever you want to do. So now suddenly you need to break it up, and now it becomes more complex because you need to change the graph, you need to change the way how things are done. So maybe you just, in certain cases, need to call a different system that you didn't really account for previously. So now you have learnings and improvements that you do on multiple different layers, which becomes super, super complex and hard to get right, because the easy solution might be you solve it and you just build a separate agent, for example. You build a sub-agent that is only responsible for that. Or it might be that you actually just do a change to your prompt. And because of that, it becomes super, super complex. And because of that, there's still a lot of work to do that you get better in estimating, okay, where do I now change the system? Where does the system store that information or that feedback that it got in order to improve? And so little longer story or a little longer views on that. But it's still developing, but we're seeing rapid progress right now.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So I guess it's fair to say then that self-learning still has a human in the loop component these days.
On the edge, I would say yes, but we now have cases where we debate that it's probably worse to get the human in again than just let the AI do the work. So it's kind of on the edge right now. And then you can calculate what's the likelihood that the human does again a mistake. And then it's really hard to filter that out as well. So not necessarily anymore in 2026. Probably it's a mix in 27, probably not anymore.
Okay, very interesting. Maybe just one more thing there. Let's say you learn something and you want to add that to the prompt, right? I mean, that probably will be done with a human in the loop, right? I mean, there's almost no other way to do it, right? Or do you literally build huge self-learning automated like mechanisms that literally add autonomously to the prompt once they learn something? Is that already happening?
Yes, that's happening. We don't put it on fully autonomous mode yet, so there is always a review. But how you do it practically is you have certain data sets or certain tests, and then you do it on these tests, and it automatically improves the prompt. Then you have a new version, you test that version live, or you do it on another data set. We could fully automate this, but we don't most of the time yet.
Okay. Man, this is so exciting. This is so interesting. Yeah, thank you for all these insights. Now, we also talked obviously here a lot about agents, humans. What is the psychological relationship that you see between an employee and an agent? Is there already something that you would call a relationship, or is it definitely not there yet? Do you see people have a little bit of, they don't like the agent because they know what the agent will do in a few years, How do you see that? Yeah.
There are different types of people. Some that are very curious and have this growth mindset and just want to experiment and do, and they start loving it. And then there are others that don't. And it's a real threat in organization. And you need to take this very carefully and seriously, that people are to some extent afraid. They wouldn't say, I'm afraid of AI, but they, especially on some levels, they suddenly see something that is as good as them. And that's intimidating, right? So like we were very good in a lot of things, and now suddenly something comes, I'm like, oh shit, this is better than me. And now it's really hard sometimes to then take a step back and see this as an opportunity to grow and improve. So I think we need to take this very seriously and be very mindful about this. So we see both. And if I can speak for myself, on the customer side, we see both people that are very excited and some people that are frightened, and they don't very explicitly say, hey, look, I don't have a good feeling with this. I don't know what this means. But they're just slow. They don't like it. They're like, it's not good. Oh, here's the mistake. That's typically then how this feeling emerges. We shouldn't do it because AI sucks. It's like, it's like, here, it did a mistake. And then we shouldn't use it. It's not ready yet. I think for myself, it's the same. Like, I always need to force myself to use the latest stuff. I always need to force myself to do everything, and it's exciting. I love it. I spent literally nights building my own AI system, my own CEO office, and I love it. But sometimes you need to look at it, and then, for example, what I now recently did, I built my office, and essentially whenever I do a call, whenever I do a transcript, I put it in there, and then I built myself a persona framework. So I have different persona feedback this. So that might be Frank Slootman for like CEO, or it might be Elon Musk, or whoever makes sense for that particular subject. And then it's hard sometimes. Then it says, oh yeah, that's a 5 out of 10, needs a lot of work. And you're like, oh, great. But I started to love that. But I'm also the person who kind of loves this stuff. I just want to get better. And then I see that over time I get slowly better. And then the feedback is actually better. So it's amazing what you can do with AI once you get into it. But it sometimes takes a little nudge. And for some people, it's a lot harder.
Believe it or not, but I think back at Konux 10 years ago, when we did these leadership sessions about non-technical stuff, I honestly think you are the person that for the first time really as a thing, as a concept, brought growth mindset to me, and then also to the other colleagues. So yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that from you, that you love expanding yourself through agents. What is actually your favorite agent?
I don't have a favorite agent anymore. I have favorite systems. So for me, it's multiple different agents that work together to get the job done. And I think 26 is going to be less about individual agents and more about systems that store information and that get the work done in like essentially an orchestrated way between different agents. And that's what I love the most right now. And I'm most excited about.
Nice. All right. Good. You also said, this psychological phenomenon of accepting that this thing is now better than yourself, right? If this is different from, there's a manager at the top of a company and then he tells, for example, you guys to integrate an agent, right? Like there's not that, like the manager will never have to admit that now an agent is better at management than him, right? Or than them. So it's a little more disconnected. But when you privately work on this stuff, I've also felt, you have to look the reality in the eye. And recently I had this experience when I tried to build a mock-up, but purely with AI models based on just a single image of myself, of a digital twin of myself in multiple video calls in parallel. Maybe you saw that that LinkedIn post. And then this was really like the first try, right? I can now disclose it. It was the first try, was already the sequence, the first sequence in that video where I thought, yep, this is good enough. Okay, on to the next sequence. And it was just me saying, oh yeah, logarithmic math, right? And the way that version of myself pronounced it, emphasized it, the way they looked at the camera, I'm sorry, but like this was better than in everything than myself. It literally was. Was it a little bit too polished for a very standard customer call? Well, yes, of course, right? But maybe that's, again, influenceable through a proper prompt engineering, right? I could, and this could also be automated, right? The prompt for a very casual customer call, some customer that I've met already 1 million times and not a first pitch to a new VC, could have a more laid back style. And then, and then when I'm really on stage or in a podcast, then I really go for that super polished version. It's crazy. It's really crazy.
100%. And it's like, I think we are people who always try to find their boundaries, right? So you're fairly good in school, then you go to university, then you're maybe humbled for the first time because math in university is not as easy as in school. And then you go on and you found companies, and there are always other people who do incredibly well as well, which is fine. But now suddenly I do things and I feedback it, or I create things and I'm like, oh shit, this is a lot better than what I could have done. And it's crazy. But for me, this is also now the biggest driver for my personal growth in the last months, because I constantly try to optimize what I'm doing, and I'm constantly giving feedback, or I'm getting feedback from the AI. So I think it's a massive opportunity for us as well. And the people that adopt it are going to get so much better. I'm going to get better at podcasts. I'm going to be a better CEO. I'm going to get better in product and in sales, one at a time. But these systems are going to help me in this tremendously. So I'm very, very excited about this for personal growth as well.
Yeah. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if in maybe, like, realistically speaking, 3 years or so, a digital twin version of you could have done this podcast, and it would look exactly as human, with the same pauses, the same thoughts, the same humanness. But of course, do we want that? No, we probably will not want that. Almost every human will not want this, because then it feels like drinking the Coca-Cola from Lidl, or from Aldi, not the original one. You still want that original thing, even if the other thing tastes exactly the same.
Exactly. What we always say, people like people, and it's much more fun that you now talk with me here and I see you rather than talking to your digital version. And I think that's the same for the visitors. Yes, not everything that we said was perfect, and you could have done this better, and you could have like more edgy stuff sometimes somewhere. Yes, all of this, but this is still what makes us special. So I will continue to do that, I guess, for a foreseeable time.
Yeah, and my digital twin wouldn't have known that you're the person who, for example, brought growth mindset to me as a concept, right? Because that context probably wouldn't have been anywhere in my documents about me or so. Yeah,
exactly. And I still have the presentation that you did at Konung stored on AI and neural networks back in the day. So it's been a long journey.
Yep, it's been a very long journey. I remember back then it was probably a neural network with 10 parameters or something like that. Now we're talking about 100 billion or 1,000 billion.
And
cool, man.
There was one other thing that I still remember, which was this Wait But Why article that was published, I think, in 2014 or January 2015. And I still sometimes use the graphics from that blog post about the future or the road to superintelligence. It's after all, like, people are now, AI has suddenly come, but that's not true. It was very predictable if you looked at it from the right wing and right angle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've started being an AI in 2012. It started for me with noise cancellation or something like that for telco stuff. And then, with Konux, we went into sensor measurement principles and replacing some human formulas, let's say, with AI or with machine learning. AI was very cringe to say back then, I remember. I never wanted to say AI. I always hated when people call it that. But this really changed a lot. I think now also it's right to call it AI. Now I feel like, yes, now we can really call it artificial intelligence. Looking at what it can do, yes. Cool. I think this concludes it. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. Really love this conversation. Very, very exciting topic. I think we should probably redo this with you every 6 months to track the insanely fast progress.
Let's do that,
so I'm sure we'll be talking again at some point. Thanks so much, Jonas. Yeah, absolutely. Me too. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.